Casey Gansner, and I'm Lolita Gopi. We're doing a series of live interviews for the promoted by the Ministry of Cow Protection and Agriculture. And we're blessed to have Casey with us today. She was raised on a farm, a dairy farm in northern West Virginia. And I know her because she spent a year working with us in New Vrindavan. And she did a great job with us. She really transformed our gardens and made them, beautiful places. She did really good work with the paths and brought a lot of enthusiasm to us. So that was, but she spent years doing 4-H programs. And can you tell us maybe about the jobs that you've had working with farmers? Or
Sure. I started off selling at farmers markets like most people. That was kind of my entry level into gardening and farming. And then EcoV found me and said, would you like to come work for us? And I thought, how exciting, because I was kind of as big as I could expand on my own gardens. So I came there and worked there for a year and did some renovating of the gardens and some programming for the temple. And then after that, I went to Grow Ohio Valley, which is a nonprofit that focuses on food security and education. I worked with farmers there because the outreach I did with farmers, the West Virginia Department of Agriculture added an ag business division, and I came on as one of the first planning coordinators. So now my job is I cover the northern part of West Virginia, and I work with farmers from anything about how to grow, how to sell their products, how to work through legal loopholes, develop business plans, and I kind of specialize in high tunnel production.
That's nice. I just really inspired by, like, what you did with Grow Ohio Valley too. So they created a food co-op for Wheeling, which is just a really nice added cultural aspect to our little city here. And they have 50 local farmers that it's kind of like, yeah.
Which is pretty amazing. For our area, 50 farmers is a lot of farmers.
Right, because it's just been a really encouraging, nice thing to add to our city. So I'm really appreciative of that what you brought to Wheeling. And so we're going to focus on high tunnels today because that's what you're focusing on, right? And in New Vrindavan, we have 4 high tunnels. And I have one at my house here. And that was because of Casey. She taught us what a high tunnel is and helped us with a grant program. So we got some funding for it. And can you describe what a high tunnel is?
Sure. In some parts of the world, they're called polytunnels. So if you're listening and you've never heard of a high tunnel, maybe you've heard it as a polytunnel. We have low tunnels and high tunnels. Low tunnels are kind of just short season extension. They go right up over your crops. A high tunnel is much like a greenhouse. The main differences are in a high tunnel, we don't heat it. And in a high tunnel, we plant our plants directly in the ground. So you see a lot of greenhouses that sell nursery bedding plants in trays or containers or pots. In a high tunnel, we're planting it just in the ground like we would outside in a garden, but it's covered under the protection. So they're usually at least 12 feet tall, anywhere from 30 to 120 feet long. They're used for season extension. The reason the USDA Department of Agriculture really promotes high tunnels is that we can get a longer production season, especially here in northern West Virginia. This year we had a frost in the middle of May. If those crops had been outside, most of them would have been destroyed, but they were protected in a high tunnel. So we grow in rows in there in lots of different ways. And usually you can get on average 2 months earlier in the spring and 2 to 3 months earlier or later in the fall on your plants.
Yeah, that's important for us because we're so much freezing and thawing. It really keeps a controlled atmosphere.
Yeah.
And it's also really nice because I'm a little attached to being right there with the dirt, and you're working right on the ground, and it's much more like a little island. I always think of it.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. It's a different world when you walk in.
Yeah.
It just feels different. It's such a wonderful atmosphere. And I know when people put them in initially, they think, oh my goodness, I have this giant plastic building. Once you start growing in it, you don't really see that anymore. You feel the plants, you feel the environment. It becomes its own little eco zone right inside.
It's true. It was like a very big and plasticky in the beginning, but as soon as it filled up with nice green plants, everybody loved it.
Yep. That first few weeks, it's a little daunting. Once
Yeah.
you see things growing, you'll see why you did it. And the other great bonus is a high tunnel protects from rain, sleet, hail, snow, these kind of things that could really batter your plants. And a lot of protection if you're doing fruits, you could have protection from birds and other things like that. So it's not just about extending your season.
So are there specific places that you would put your high tunnel? Like I'm thinking like drainage might be an issue, or
I would say drainage is the number one issue. I've worked with some people who've invested just as much in the prep of the land as they did the structure themselves. I have people who kind of dodge the drainage and they really, really regret it. I mean, think of it. Would you plant a garden bed in a place that water stands? No. So when you build this structure, you're collecting more and more water, especially coming off those sides. If you don't have a plan for draining that away, you can have some major issues. There are very, very few plants that like wet feet. That's how I describe it. If that water stays down at those roots, that's when you can have a lot of disease issues. So we really need to think about the slope of the land, and a little bit of slope is okay because that kind of helps that runoff. You're not going to want to build it on a hillside. Another thing to think about is wind. You know, there are some areas, if you're very exposed, can do a lot of damage to the plastic. So, you know, think about those things when you're doing it. Sunlight, you don't want any trees close. You know, if a tree falls on it, that will go through the plastic. So thinking about your site prep, and a lot of people don't think about this one, keep it close to your home.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Out of sight is out of mind. You know, I have a lot of people who have very large farms and their high tunnels might be a 3 or 4 minute drive to the other side of their farm. You're not going to pay as much attention to it. You're not going to have eyes on it, and you're not going to spend as much time there. You know, make it like kind of your second home. And I promise you, once you get used to it being there, it won't look so odd.
Yeah.
Mine is less than 8 feet from my porch.
Right.
But I go in it 100 times a day because it's right there.
Yeah, that it becomes a part of your life. Yeah. You talked a little bit about drainage. Do you want to maybe show them, because you're not getting that rain coming in, so you have to do something for water. So what kind of water issues do you, irrigation or?
So lots of things to think about with your water. First of all, if you're growing food in there versus flowers or something like that, we got to think about water quality. If you're not using a city water system, we highly suggest at least once a year, have your water tested for E. coli. You got to make sure there's nothing too bad in that water. Now, if you would test high for E. coli, one way around it is to solely use drip tape. Drip tape looks like a large straw, and it has holes in it every 6, 12, 18 inches. You choose how far away the holes are based on what you're planting. What drip tape does is it slowly drips straight into your soil. So that water would never touch your tomato. That water would never touch your berries. The other bonus is to that, plants don't drink from their leaves. So if you're using overhead irrigation or a spray hose, you can spread a lot of bacteria and funguses. So our high tunnel is a very humid climate, and it's a contained climate. So if I'm spraying these plants and they have, let's say, a fungus or a blight on them, by spraying them, I'm spreading it. But if I'm using drip tape, which is focusing on the roots that drink that water, I won't be spreading that disease. And I'll actually use way less water. So people think, oh, I'm going to spend this money, which is not very expensive. I think 1,000-foot roll of drip tape around here where I am is less than $100. That is a very long roll of tape.
Yeah.
The header pieces you're going to use every year, so that's more of a long-term investment, but you're going to have control over the water. So outside, we don't have a lot of control. You can get too much water. You can get not enough water. In a high tunnel, you can hone in on what your plant really needs. And the great thing is, let's say you have a crop that doesn't like a lot of water, but in your next row, you have one that loves water. I can control which row is being watered each day. So you can let the plants really thrive that you just can't do outside. We don't have that control.
Right. It's been so nice. We have a drip line irrigation system out in my high tunnel, and it was just really warm, hot weather, and the kind of weather you don't even want to go outside, but you just turn your irrigation system on and your whole garden gets watered. It was really easy. Yeah. And the hard part was keeping track of the time. So I would say get a timer.
Yes.
But yeah.
Get a timer. I have a lot of people who have a timer on every row.
Oh, okay.
They're like, oh, this row, there are some plants. I have a couple people who are really high elevation, really direct sun, and they'll leave their drip tape running all day long. I mean, you're not using that much water. And especially if you're not using city water, let's say you're using a pond or a spring or a creek,
I see.
you're not paying for that water.
Right.
You can really efficiently water your plants.
That's nice.
And if you have good drainage, you can get away with that. Now, if you don't have good drainage and you have clay soil and you leave your drip tape running all day, you're going to come back to a little bit of a pond.
Right. There was a couple of tricks, like you put the holes up in the drip line so that your water comes out the top of the drip line. It goes into the soil.
I also suggest putting your drip tape above your ground cover. Most YouTube videos and things like that tell you to put it underneath. There's two problems with that. Drip tape is thin. It will inherently get a hole or a leak or a kink in it. If I put that under my ground cover, let that be a woven plastic, a straw, a hay, whatever I choose, or mulch, I then have to find the hole.
Yeah.
So you can spend, I used to run around listening just to hear those drips under there. The other thing is chipmunks, squirrels, rabbits, they'll chew on drip tape. Rats, mice, and then that can cause you a hole, and then you have to search for it. So it might not be as beautiful when you're initially planting, having that drip tape very visible. Once those plants grow, it disappears, and you'll have a lot easier access to take care of any problems.
Right. And you said it's so much more effective to just put that water right at the root of the plant.
Yes.
And
and it's not drinking from its leaves. You're not really doing anything to help it by spraying from above. And that's the nice thing too. You can pick the distance. So let's say you're doing raspberry bushes in your high tunnel. You don't need it every 6 inches or even every 12. You probably need it 18 inches or 2 feet apart. So you can really tailor your watering to the plant.
I was wondering if you maybe supposed to plant your plants right by the holes in the drip tape, if that would be more effective.
You can't. It's hard to match up.
Okay.
But I usually go for it. If you don't want to purchase more than one roll, go for 12-inch.
Okay.
That's pretty much across the board going to take care of everything.
So 12 inches is the space between the holes on the drip line. Yeah. Okay. Now you mentioned squirrels and stuff. I haven't had any visitors like that yet. I have I have some chicken wire protection on the sides, but that is one thing that's really good is you can kind of control, who gets in and who doesn't, right?
Yes, you can isolate. So you can isolate with chicken wire, which is going to keep rabbits and deer and birds and those kind of things out. One issue is groundhogs. That chicken wire on the side is not going to deter them. I have a couple people, this may seem extreme, dig 3 feet out from their high tunnel, lay wire, like the chicken wire fencing, then bury it to make a barrier from them digging under.
Yeah.
I've seen lots of creative options. I have some people who have fences around their high tunnels, so it's like a fence within a fence.
Okay.
The other thing is insect exclusion. So you have the option to stop insects from coming in. Now this gets somewhat extreme because there's lots of ways to get into a high tunnel. Most of them have roll up sides. So you're going to put this screen on the inside. So when we roll them up, you still have that protection. But then you have these big doors on each end. Oh, and then you have these vents up in the ridges. So all of these spots have to be covered with a screen. I work with some commercial growers who actually have a isolation air pocket before you go into the high tunnel.
Oh my gosh, wow.
They can make sure they have no squash bugs or anything on them when they go in. The only problem with that is we all know that we need some insects. Yeah. So we have chosen to put up one of these screens to eliminate insects. we still need beneficial ones, which means we have to bring them in. And things like lacewings and ladybugs and beneficial nematodes and mason bees. So when you're thinking about the crops you're growing and say, oh, I have such a hard time with cucumber beetles. Remember at the same time, if you don't let them in, the bees aren't getting in. So what do I do for that? I choose a paranthropic, which simply means self-pollinating crop.
Oh,
So a
okay.
traditional cucumber needs bees or something to pollinate.
Mm-hmm.
But now there are hybrid crops that allow you to grow in a high tunnel or a greenhouse without the bees to pollinate. So you always kind of got to be thinking 2 steps ahead of yourself. That you fix one problem, but is that adding a new one?
Sure.
So in general, most people I work with do not do the insect exclusion for that reason. The natural environment tends to balance itself. And by you putting down this hard barrier saying nothing comes in here, in the long run, it might not be that great. Yeah, you might get a lot of cucumbers those first couple years. Right. But what are you missing by everything else coming in?
We've kind of done both things in our area. We've tried both. I have my beehive right next to the high tunnel. So it's kind of nice to see the bees visiting the flowers, and we get
them working. They're
butterflies in there. Yeah, that's always fun.
Mason bees are another good option. They don't sting, and they can actually live in little wooden boxes right in your high tunnel, and they do just as good of a job as pollinating.
Nice. I have experienced the cucumber beetle though, so I'm thinking, well, maybe but maybe like those low tunnels in the high tunnels.
Yes.
So
a low tunnel, for anyone that doesn't know, we usually use metal hoops or something, and this excludes right over top of the plant. So when I work with people that are organic, and I will tell you 99% of the high tunnel growers I work with grow organically. They're really concerned about the natural environment and taking care of the land they're growing on. What they will do is they'll put that low tunnel over their cucumbers, cantaloupes, anything that is in the cucurbit family. And what they will do is they'll keep that low tunnel over it until it blooms. So again, if this is not a paranthropic, self-pollinating, you're going to have to take that cover off at some point so the bees can come in there and do their work. Luckily, as the plant, a cucumber, a melon, gets older, it has more resistance to those squash bugs or those cucumber beetles. So the goal is to get it old enough, and then it can be exposed.
Yeah, it gets a little stronger, and then you can take it out of the screen.
Cucumber beetles are rough. At Grow Ohio Valley, our first year in the high tunnel, 30 by 90 foot high tunnel, completely filled with cucumbers. We lost every single one of them.
Oh my gosh.
The next year, we invested $300 in home screen. So that's another thing. You don't have to go to some fancy greenhouse supplier. We went to Lowe's and ordered screens for your windows by the giant roll. We were able to do pest exclusion for $300.
That's great. Okay,
and
good.
That year, we had thousands and thousands of cucumbers.
Nice. You talked a little bit about organic, because that is an important thing it's pretty popular. I know there's a danger of salt in your high tunnel. So how does that work?
So salt buildup. So in our area, high tunnels are pretty new. Most people probably haven't had them more than about 5 years. What we're starting to see is what kind of tipped us off was we had some pepper growers who were on their 3rd year of growing in their high tunnel. And they were getting really large pepper plants. I mean, like waist high with no fruit on them. And the peppers weren't setting fruit. They weren't getting flowers. So they started testing the soil, and salts is something that we had never really tested for. That wasn't what we were looking for. And they were testing through the roof. Now, when we talk about salts, this is a buildup on top of the soil. Sometimes you can see it in houseplants. If you've ever had a houseplant that kind of gets this white grayish hue on top of the potting soil in there, that's a salt buildup. Those salts almost always come from your fertilizers. It can come from manure. So cow manure is not immune to salt buildup.
Okay.
There's no fertilizer out there that won't do it. The reason we've never seen this as a regular grower is outside, we don't get salt buildup because it rains, because there's wind, because there's natural erosion. So as you're fertilizing your high tunnel year after year, that chemical has nowhere to go. Whether or not it's a natural chemical or a synthetic chemical, it's still a chemical. Everything's made up of chemical compounds. So without all that rain coming down, it's not washing away. So there are a few things we can do. The easiest is to remove your plastic every 3 to 5 years and leave it off for about 6 months. Most people do this through the winter when their high tunnel is taking a rest, or you can do it in the summer. It's up to you, whatever is the not peak season for your sales, because some people winter sales is where it's at. So the natural wind and rain will take care of those salts. Other people don't want to lose half a year to letting that soil rest, so they will flood their high tunnel. So it takes about 6 to 12 inches of water, which is, you guys, we're talking about a 30 by 120 foot space. It is a ton of water, but you kind of got to offset the cost. If you can sell $5,000 worth of stuff during that time, a couple $100 worth of water might be worth it. So we're washing all that buildup away. Eventually, plants will not grow in there. If you have too high of salt levels, there will become a point when things just won't grow. So, when people first put those up, they don't think about that, but the natural environment does so much to your soil and your land, and you're kind of stopping that in there. So we recommend twice a year getting your soil tested. Most places it's free. If not, it's very inexpensive. And there's no other way to really know what's going on in there. So we're looking for salts. We're also looking for organic matter content. So we're looking for, believe it or not, we don't want too high of a number. So they're going to do an organic matter test, and this is showing how much biomass is in there. And, people get really excited about compost and fertilizers in their high tunnels, and they can actually have negative effects on your plant. Once again, you might get a huge plant and no fruit. So we want to monitor those levels, and extension agents and people like myself, but you're going to get that back, and it might be very confusing what that report says, but we can really narrow that down to tell you what to do. Recommending for fertilizing, I really like kelp-based, seaweed-based fertilizers. Cow manure is fine, but it's very high on the salt levels. So you need to use it in moderation. If you're outside, you don't. It's going to rain. If there's going to be wind, snow. Maybe not snow for everyone. I'm thinking about where everybody's located. Rain, hopefully. I use nothing but natural fertilizers. There are a lot of synthetic fertilizers on the market. They are even worse on the salt buildup. Plant-based fertilizers are going to have the least long-term negative effects.
Okay.
So try to find something natural.
I know when I was going to put a lot of cow dung in my tunnel, they also said, well, you're going to bring in a lot of weed seeds. So
yeah, I have a lot of people use horse. You will regret horse manure so quickly, because you will be growing every single thing that horse ever ate.
I see.
Those seeds don't get killed off very easily. So if you are using that, you need to get it to a really high temperature prior to going in, so that all weed seeds have been killed off.
Okay. And is there different weed suppression things that you can do inside your tunnel?
Sure. So I prefer a woven ground cover. And yeah, it is plastic based, but you already have a plastic building. So, I mean, you can't be too anti-plastic. But what's great about it is it's UV protected for 5 years. So you won't have any leaching of the chemicals. And unlike a traditional plastic, which I would never recommend, especially in a high tunnel, like the garbage bag material that rolls out, very cheap. It's like 3 cents per square foot. The woven ground cover is more, but it lasts for 5 years or more, and it allows nutrients, mineral, and water to go through between the weaves. So it's woven together like a blanket, so you can still get the water in. If I were to use a traditional plastic ground cover, it's a barrier. It's like having a high tunnel on the ground, so we can't get all the good stuff in there. Other options are straw, wood mulches. A lot of people I work with get mulch from tree companies. What kind of trees you're getting. You don't want walnut in there if you're growing tomatoes. They don't work well together. Cardboard. Cardboard works wonderful. It will eventually break down. So you can maybe do it a couple times a year, layering that cardboard in your walkways.
Mm-hmm.
The number one thing I suggest is do not try to do it with no ground cover. The only way I've seen that effective is using a flame torch.
Right.
So those can either be handheld and when you burn out the weeds, or they have rolling ones. They're kind of expensive. That's hand picking weeds is not efficient, and most of the time you miss the roots, and they're going to come right back anyways.
Right. We have two systems going. We are trying the flame throwing thing.
Okay.
And I have black mulch, and now the black mulch actually will heat your soil a little bit, so you can plant earlier. Maybe you have the
Okay. I even have some people who lay down a silage tarp, which is a big all-covering tarp to heat up that soil early in the season. The only negative is come August, when you desperately want it to be cooler in the high tunnel.
Oh, I see.
And heat it up. But luckily at that point, the plants are kind of covering it and you're not getting so much direct sun. There are other color options. When I was at EcoV, we tested red ground cover for tomatoes.
Okay.
About a 10 to 20% increase in yield. A lot of strawberry growers will use a white ground cover to get more reflection on the berries. Because we need sunshine on the berries to get them to ripen. So the white ground cover helps them ripen faster.
I didn't know that. Okay, that's neat.
We also make one that is completely biodegradable, and it's a brown plastic, and it can be chilled right back into the ground.
Okay.
So there's so much out there.
And I'm having fun using the cardboard boxes from the temple kitchen. We're recycling them and using them again.
You want stuff like that? You're doing double duty when you do that. You're eliminating waste. You're adding carbon to your soil. And I think you should mention what you're doing with composting, since we just talked about composting.
Well, I'm a little nervous. It's only been maybe 6-8 months now, but I've just been taking the compost from the temple, and I dug a 1.5 foot, like a trench through the middle of the high tunnel. And so because we have a lot of cow dung, we have a little dairy barn here. So I add my cow manure, preferably like I do the bedding packs. So it's got a lot of hay in it, and add the scraps from the kitchen, and we put our paper in there. My daughter, we shred our paper even. We're pretty determined here. My younger generation is very concerned about the environment. So we kind of mix that up in our tunnel and then use it as a walkway. So I have pallets over the top of it. So it's not taking up any space. It's all working underground, and it seems to be having a lot of life in there. We have a lot of worms in there, and I have a couple concerns. I don't want to talk too much. Like, I don't know if I want to encourage people yet, because it does seem to have a lot of insects in there. So I don't know if that
you need to have it super covered. So what a lot of people will do is they'll use solid wood on top. That way those insects aren't getting out. The best option is to cover with soil. So when you're starting to see fruit flies and other things, come in there and mix in some more soil. So you want to keep suppressing that, so it's going to keep working. I have some people who will just keep it in a single corner, and they'll actually use that compost within their high tunnel to add some heat in the winter.
Oh, I was thinking it would warm things up. Yeah.
Yeah, you're not gaining a ton. I mean, it's not equivalent to adding a furnace, but you're warming things up. So yeah, the insects will be an issue. So your first defense is use a solid covering.
Right, I put cardboard on top, and then
cardboard on top, plywood, something so they're not coming out of there. Keep it in a concentrated area. Keep it somewhere where you can turn it on occasion. The best thing you can do is to add some soil to it.
Okay.
So it will be more like the natural environment out there on the side.
Right, and let it work underground there.
Anytime you're composting, it's ideal to also add soil to it. It seems kind of counterproductive. I'm going to take my good soil that I want and I'm going to add it to my compost, but you're going to get it back eventually.
Right.
And having a lot of worms helps too. Gives them something to eat.
Do you recommend like those red worms, or
that's what most people do? Red wigglers. Yeah.
So that's I wanted you to maybe mention like the sides and like the setup of the high tunnel. Like it
Sure.
has two nice big doors, and then I have a fan on mine. So because ventilation is part of this, right?
Keeping air moving is the healthiest thing you can do for your plants, especially if you're growing things like tomatoes. Without air movement, they're not going to get pollinated. So different plants get pollinated different ways. Tomatoes are wind pollinated. So in a high tunnel, even if you've got good ventilation and airflow, you can come through and shake those plants, and that helps it drops its pollen. And over about 95 degrees, tomatoes get really sticky and they'll stop dropping their pollen. So one of the ways we can combat this is to have constant airflow. So almost all high tunnels, I won't say all, have roll-up sides. These can be hand cranked, or you can get fancy and they can be automated. You can set them to roll up at a certain temperature. I have some people who are, again, growing at high elevation, and they have control on their phone, not based on temperature. So they might see that there's going to be high wind, and they're worried about their tomato plants being broken. Or they might see, there's a big storm coming in and they don't want water splashing in on the sides. Your end walls, lots of options. You can do removable end walls. A lot of perennial berry growers will not even have solid ends at all.
Okay.
You can make them large enough to get a tractor through, or they can be as small as a regular house door. On the top, you can have ridge vents. This takes a lot of the hot air out. We have some people now who are doing a high vent on one end, and then on the other end, the vents are at ground level. So we know that heat rises. So what this does is the cool air is coming in through those lower vents, it's rising up and through, and it's going out the upper vents.
That's smart, yeah.
It's really, that's letting, again, the natural environment do its job. We're bringing in the cold, we're getting out the hot. Just keeping airflow is really important. One year we did a little study in our high tunnel, and we hung hundreds of little pieces of little light fabric to see where air was moving and where it wasn't. And that let us identify our issues with ventilation. Planting your plants too close together in a high tunnel is a huge no-no. Again, beginning of that season, you see all this bare ground and you think, we gotta fill it up. I'm gonna cheat, and I'm gonna plant my tomatoes 16 inches apart instead of 2 feet. Looks fine until you get to summer and you have a jungle and air can't move and you can't efficiently harvest and the plants start to block each other out. So unfortunately, less is more in the high tunnel. Your plants are going to grow bigger and better than outside. So therefore that spacing, even though we want to grow as much as we can and we want to be able to sell as much, or we want to be able to eat as much, you need to kind of rein yourself in. So within a high tunnel, I always suggest air on the side of too much space. So that way that ventilation is getting in there. 2 feet on a tomato seems like a lot of space, but it really isn't for the health of that plant. We want it to breathe. They breathe just like we do.
And there's also the aspect that you can grow up, right? You can use your trellising systems, and
those trellises above you can serve so many functions. So we use, I wish I had a tomato clip. We clip and string tomatoes. You can use netting. Lots of ways to recycle it. I actually used an old volleyball net in one of my high tunnels. It was the perfect trellis for pole beans. You can get really creative, but you have all these great heavy duty trusses above you, so they can handle a lot of weight. And I will tell you, at the end of the season, if you're growing an indeterminate tomato, which means it continues to grow, they can be 20, 30 feet long. So we will take them up to the top and we will bring them back down, and we will keep taking them up and down.
Oh, that's how you do it. Okay. I was wondering, they're up there now, so I'm...
It's called lean and lower. So once you hit your highest peak, you now are going to train that tomato to go back down. And then if you're really lucky and you're such a great grower and your season's gone so well, there's a chance that you might then have to redirect it to go back up.
And then you do a lot of pruning on your plants to keep the airflow. Yeah. Okay.
Be careful. So based on what you've grown, if you're growing an indeterminate tomato, that means it basically keeps growing until it gets too cold. We definitely suggest removing all of the leaves until your first fruit set.
Mhm.
Suckers, that's the little spots growing in between the main stems. We remove those. Now, if you're growing a determinate, which means it sets its fruit basically all at once and you harvest in about 2 weeks. If you're growing a determinate tomato, one, they're a little more susceptible to sun scald, so they can get that discoloration on the shoulders of the tomato. And two, if you do a lot of pruning, you're actually pruning away the potential for a tomato. So traditionally, a determinate tomato is field grown, aromas, paste tomatoes, things like that. Those are never pruned because they know they're only going to get really one major harvest off of it. So really know the plant that you're planting from all stages before you even put it in there.
Right. So are there some things that grow better in the high tunnels than others? I mean, what kind of things grow in there?
I would say almost nothing. Everything grows in the high tunnel, but you have to think about, is it worth it?
Okay.
Beans are kind of a good example. They grow really well outdoors. So you got to think, am I going to take all this space to grow something that can thrive just as well a few feet away without that protection?
Yeah.
Also thinking about, am I going to grow a perennial? So if I'm growing a blueberry or a raspberry or something that is going to be in this spot for 3 years, I have to know that this is worth taking up this much space in my high tunnel. Really, it's based on seasonality. So I'm not going to put cabbage in a high tunnel in April, like maybe I would outside, because it's just going to get too hot for it. Yeah. But I might be able to plant that cabbage in February when there's no way I could have planted it outside. And we want it to be done and gone before we're bringing in those summer crops. Okay. So in theory, you can easily get 3 rotations, possibly 4. But that's kind of a good lead into your 4th time, you should consider a cover crop. Okay. Now, this is again for the health of your soil. So let's say I grew tomatoes and I grew large hard squashes, things that take a lot of nutrients out of my soil. A tomato will just keep eating all that stuff from your soil. And I harvest that out and I'd say, okay, what's going to come next? Well, if I would follow that with something like a cabbage that also needs a lot of nutrients, that ground is just going to be spent. It's going to be really rough. It's not going to have a lot of nutrients. Okay. So the natural way to combat that versus using a whole lot of fertilizer is to plant a cover crop. Lot of options. We can do wheats, we can do rye, vetches, cowpeas. Those are mostly fall and winter cover crops. Let's say I grow lettuce and my market is December through February when nobody else has anything growing. So therefore, I'm going to want a cover crop in the summer. There are some summer options, or if you live in an area where you don't get cold winters, there's something called sun hemp. It's not hemp. It's not even in the hemp family. That just ironic. Yeah. It's really, really beautiful. The bonus is that you could use it for a cut flower. It grows the most beautiful flowers and it's a cover crop.
So that'd be a summer cover crop.
That would be a summer cover crop, or if you live somewhere where you don't get cold winters.
I see.
So you let it gets really tall, 6-7 feet tall.
Oh, fun. Okay.
It's beautiful. So then you're going to either cut it down with a scythe or a weed whacker or crimp it down. And then you can either let it lay and cover it with a tarp and you're going to compost it. Again, it's going to smell like it's a rotting plant and it might not be so pleasant in that moment, but it's going to do a lot of good. Your other option is you can till it in, like mow it down and till it in. That's going to add carbon and nitrogen to that soil. So it's actually fixing nitrogen like a inoculated bean or a pea. Right. There's some other options there too, but it's something to really think about. You can only use that soil so many times before you give back.
And that's interesting that because I'm seeing that in the summer, everybody's growing everything. So your real advantage to a high tunnel is that off season in the fall and the spring and the winter.
People love their tomatoes, but boy, everyone, there is a world beyond tomatoes. And I have people who say, well, I planted my tomatoes in April and it's November 1st and they're still producing. I just can't pull them out.
Yeah.
Well, that means you've missed an entire season of amazing things you could plant. So in general, in our region, early September is the last time you're really going to direct seed in that high tunnel. But
Hmm.
you can do beets and turnips and lettuces and spinaches and greens. And I mean, there's so many things that will survive not only into winter, many will survive through winter, like kale, collard greens, anything that can take cold weather. Beets, you can plant beets in the fall, leave them in your high tunnel all winter, and harvest as needed.
Nice.
Carrots are a great
Mhm.
one that work a little better in warmer weather to get them started.
Okay.
Again, they will overwinter. Nothing is better than a carrot picked when it's cold out. It's actually sweeter.
Nice.
So if you hang on those tomatoes till November, you've kind of missed this window to do a lot of other things. So again, if you have an outside environment that does well for tomatoes, maybe consider only doing your very, very early tomatoes, or flip it the other direction. Don't plant tomatoes till August. Do a late tomato.
Oh, fun. Okay.
Yeah, which is what I just transplanted tomatoes yesterday. And it's
Okay.
August. But
Yeah.
those were taken from suckers. So I take my summer tomato plants, I take suckers off of them, I root those plants to be my late producers.
Nice. Okay.
You gotta be always thinking like, what's gonna come next? What's the best thing to follow with?
Mm-hmm.
Another idea is interplanting. So companion plants like marigolds and herbs, let those plants work together, and just the environment will be so much more pleasing when your plants are working together.
And you said it can be good for hard to grow plants too. Like maybe you want to grow Indian vegetables or
I wanted to bring up bitter melon. What's the other name for bitter melon so everyone knows?
Oh gosh.
Oh,
I'm
I
sorry.
forget. Anyways, so a good example is Vidya at Ecovy is growing bitter melon in her high tunnel. Here's the bonuses to that. It's a long grow. It can be up to 120 days. By planting it in the high tunnel, she got a couple months jump start. She was harvesting bitter melon by July. It's a crop that you cannot purchase in local grocery stores. She has a local demand. She's growing something that she wants and that you can't find. So you are increasing your growing zone by 2 or 3 warmer levels is the best way to describe it. So my high tunnel in northern West Virginia is the equivalent of growing outdoors in South Carolina or Georgia. So I'm getting closer to the equator by adding this new environment. Growing some fruits that you don't find at a grocery store. You do need to think about if you're planting in the spring, you're going to need transplants. So you're probably going to have to start those seeds indoors because your soil has to be warm enough for that seed to germinate. So always check your seed pack, see what the ideal soil temperature is, and know the soil temperature in your high tunnel.
Okay. Let's see. Did we miss anything that you wanted to talk about? Did you?
I just want to encourage people, even if it's not a high tunnel and you're not spending a ton of money to build a large structure, there are lots of ways to extend your season, like the low tunnel version. Just know that one high tunnel can provide for a family pretty well. I mean, it's really a high level of self-sufficiency, especially if you grow a lot of different crops. So think about why you're growing. Are you growing to feed your family and preserve? Base your growing plan on that. Is your goal to sell the food that you're growing? That's a different plan. Right. Or are you simply looking to grow things you can't get? If that's what you want, you say, every time I go to the grocery store, there's these 5 things I can never find. Maybe that's something that you could grow yourself.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing all this with us. I love my high tunnel. I mean, I'm having a great time with it. And like in the winter, when it's just too cold to go outside, I can be out there in my high tunnel. And I just want to thank you for encouraging all of us to
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I don't know what else we want to talk about. So
it's all about planning. So really, 6 months in advance. That's pretty much my guide. A lot of the things you grow in a high tunnel, you're not going to be able to go to a store to buy those transplants. Thinking ahead, are you going to grow those yourself? Are you going to find another farmer to start those plants? Don't plant your spring plants until you kind of have an idea what you're going to do in the fall. So always think one growing session ahead.
Right.
And you won't get caught up.
And so you don't want to leave it bare at all, right? You want to always keep planting.
If you're going to leave something bare, cover crop it.
Okay.
But we don't have that wind erosion like we would outside, but we still want to always think about the health of that soil. That is the most important soil in production on your farm, wherever it may be. That little square space of soil is so, so very important. So don't forget about what's under the ground. All those things that are making up that little ecosystem within the soil are so important. And there becomes a point when chemical fertilizers and herbicides, they're not going to work eventually, or they're going to start hurting you in the long end. So really think about all the inputs that are going into that high tunnel.
Right. And I was reading that one of the biggest mistakes people make is the location, right? Like that you have to, like, I know we put a lot of time into preparing the spot, and we put drainage pipes in the ground on both sides, covered them with gravel, and made it level, because we, in West Virginia here, we have just hills. So
think ahead, don't go by a high tunnel and just throw it up in a spot. In fact, you should watch that for the year prior. See what drainage looks like in the spring. See how things grow in the fall. If you choose a spot that's nice and level and it doesn't have a lot of standing water, but you notice that the pasture there, the grass doesn't grow well, maybe there's a reason. Have that soil test before you choose the spot. Watch how things grow there. Also, watch how animals move through that environment. Is this a everyday path for a deer? Is this where, these turkeys love to walk through my field? Like, really get a sense for the environment that you're putting this in. Spring drainage is a huge one. It might look like it's the greatest spot in the world in the fall. In the spring, it has standing water every day.
And then I was thinking the Gothic roof looks like a point, right? And that, if with the snow, because we get a lot of snow here, so the weight of that snow, you might be worried that it could cave in, but that shape of the roof is helpful for people who are in snowy areas.
So a lot of people will see the hoop ones.
Yeah.
If you're in a snowy area, we do not suggest a hoop. Yeah. But if you're in a more tropical area, or even, Florida, Georgia, that area, that hoop one may be better for you. If you're never worried about snow, it might not be worth that extra cost. So again, it's really knowing your environment.
And we also got a shade cloth, so we could say less sunlight when we want it.
So I was trying to think about, if people were on right now and they were in an area where it never gets cold, why would I want a high tunnel? Shade cloth. Okay. So there are some crops that do way better without direct sunlight and less heat. So in those areas, a high tunnel could serve the exact opposite. It's extending the season through the hot time of year by providing shade.
So they would take the plastic off and put...
So you could do plastic and shade cloth, or some people do shade tunnels.
I see.
And it solely is there for shade. And then I have, they're called caterpillar tunnels. They're a little more mobile. You can do shade cloth, take it off, pest exclusion, netting, take it off, and then put plastic in the winter. These ones are really small and mobile, so you can change your outer covering to the time of year as you need it.
Right, and that as we have these crazy weather patterns, it's really nice to be able to control your environment.
Exactly. It's a controlled environment.
And we even have like a thermometer, it's like a computerized thermometer that tells you how hot it is, and then the fan comes on at a certain temperature, and you can really get some how do you say that?
Automated. So know your air temperature and know your soil temperature. Those are two things that you should be monitoring. And I see it says we have a question from the audience.
Okay.
Question.
Let's see.
Okay.
I'll find it for you.
Some good things to plant for fall harvest. Oh, wonderful. So in fact, in our area, fall is when we're seeing the most diversity. So if we're wanting to harvest, let's say September, October, we could have been planting our hard squashes back in early July. So hard squashes, of course, tomatoes, September, October in a high tunnel is when tomato season peaks. So when the whole rest of the world is like kind of down on tomato production, it's up in a high tunnel. Eggplant, melons, small individual cantaloupes do really well when they're trellised. Late season strawberries are a great one for inside of a high tunnel. If you think about it, if you're harvesting in the fall in a high tunnel, it's sort of the equivalent of what is available in July and August in a traditional outdoor garden. The even better thing about fall is it's an opportunity to plant for late fall and winter. So in September, things like carrots, beets, small cabbages, lettuce, greens, turnips, all these things that have less than an 80-day grow can really thrive in the fall. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to having, fresh greens all winter long. This is going to be
winter.
Yeah.
Spinach does really well, but I will caution everyone, you need to start it early and transplant it in for the fall because it will not be able to handle the heat of a high tunnel probably until October. It's just too hot. So that would be too late in the season to direct feed it. Because right now, August is when we're getting our transplants going for fall production.
Interesting. So, okay.
Broccoli, cauliflower is just being planted out maybe now, a couple weeks from now, so that I have a November harvest. So on your seed packet, it always says number of days till harvest, count backwards. So farmer math is always counting back. This will be ready in 80 days. Okay, I need to know when 80 days before that is. Is it before my frost? Does it go in my high tunnel? So really pay attention to your seeds.
Okay. Sorry, I've got some call coming in. Yeah, so it's time to start starting my plants for the fall is what I need to be doing now.
You're getting a little late, but some of them you'll be fine. If you're going to do broccoli or cauliflower, those seeds need to be in your trays probably by the first week of August.
Okay.
Shorter grows.
One of the things that you've been doing that I'm just really proud of is that I wanted to talk about how you set up a food co-op, right? Or you didn't set it. Maybe
it has the public market.
A part of it, but that was just so inspiring.
This is a year-round farmers market that is a full-service grocery store. We just had our Commissioner of Agriculture come and visit the other day. Grow Ohio Valley's public market, which is kind of a separate entity, the first 7 months they were open. Let me mention that they opened in October, so that was past growing season here. Most of the stuff was coming from high tunnels. They returned $100,000 in 7 months to the farmers that sold to the public market.
Nice.
And in Wheeling, West Virginia, in an area where there's not a lot of farming, $100,000 in farm sales is amazing. And that money is going back to local farmers. But I think the most exciting part is people have access to local food. 7 days a week, not just 2 hours on a Saturday morning at the farmer's market. It gives access to people to have food they probably never had before. And they also, they take SNAP. So they take food stamps, they double SNAP. They have programs for senior citizens to get fresh food. It's really exciting. We have a few of these in the state of West Virginia. We're seeing them come all over the country. It's good for farmers, but it's also really good for the community.
Right. And the way that things are displayed and just the marketing is so attractive. I think
it's very inviting.
Do a great job with that. And it's a real focus on the people involved in the growing and just supporting our local farmers like that. It's really nice. And something I think that as a devoted community, we could really, try to make within our, working together, getting all the farmers working together.
Absolutely. We're getting the time to wrap up. If anybody has additional questions, I am always available. They have my email. I can send you information. I'm always here to help.
Yeah. Thank you for your time, Casey. Really appreciate everything you're doing.
Have a good day. Thank you so much. I I hope everyone is encouraged.
Okay. Have a good day.